now we go to the last part of our webinar, and that's our podcast with Janna Besamusca and with Jakub. For both, it's maybe hot, and Janna was a bit sick, but I think they're there.
We are both here, yeah.
Yes, you're both there.
I'm here, and I can see Jakub as well.
Yeah.
I suggest you introduce yourself and try to be short. We're a bit over time, but not so much. So we do reasonable good. And I think so far it's highly interesting because it's a huge variation of what you can do with CBAs. What is the effect of COBRA, whether it's in Indonesia or in Italy or in the Netherlands? So it's super interesting. Go ahead, Janna and Jakub.
Yes, thank you very much, Pauline. And thank you everyone for sticking with us. I'm sure we can do this in 15 minutes. So that means that we will finish perfectly on time. My name is Janna Besamusca. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an assistant professor in interdisciplinary social sciences at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I'm also the principal investigator on 2 projects that study wages in collective agreements. And that is the Bar Wage project that will kick off after the summer, and a project that we do together with Eurofound on building a Eurofound CBA database. And we wanted to take the opportunity here at the midterm conference to have a conversation about wage floors and pay scales in CBAs. And that is partly because there's just a lot of movement on this topic in terms of policy areas. You might have heard that there is a draft deal on the EU directive on minimum wages, which really brings this topic into focus. And on the other hand, we want to bring it up because collectively negotiated pay really is such a bread and butter issue of collective bargaining that it's really surprising how little we actually know about this, especially from a comparative perspective. So I will talk about this joined by Jakub Kostolny. Jakub, you're trained as in sociology, European studies, and political science. You used to work as a data analyst at CELSI, one of the partners of the Bar COVID project. Amongst other things, you then used to work with the data of the CBA, the wage indicator CBA database. And a while ago, you transferred to the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions, Eurofound. And there you've recently worked on Eurofound's annual minimum wage report, as well as a project that you and I work together on, which is a pilot project to create a Eurofound CBA database on collectively agreed wage floors. And that pretty much makes you the ideal partner to discuss this issue with, because you know both about the legal minimum wages and the CBAs, and you've been on both sides of this table. So thank you for joining us here. And
thank you for the introduction, and welcome everyone.
I want to start by just asking you to tell us a little bit about the Eurofound CBA database. And essentially, so what is it and why do we need it?
Yeah. So basically the Eurofound CBA database, it all started because of Eurofound expertise on the minimum wages and the annual review that is being done here by my colleague Christine Almayer. And basically, based on this, at the request of the European Parliament, the European Commission has contracted Eurofound via a framework agreement to study the topic of collectively agreed pay. And basically, as you say, the topic is very complex, and there are huge gaps in knowledge in this field, and also very little systematic data. Maybe to also say, most of the European countries, they follow the statutory minimum wages, but there are 6 countries, mostly the Nordics, Italy, Austria, and Cyprus, which do not have a statutory wage. And yeah, I think the main reason why we study this topic, I will help myself with the directive, is that the aim of the directive is an effective minimum wage protection of workers. It has been said before, so that's the ultimate objective. But I think we'll talk about this later on, the topic of or the aim of this project is a little bit different from the directive. So they both deal with the same topic. However, the aims are a little bit different. For our database, which is in some extent of exploratory nature of setting up the methodology and basically looking at the national data registers, what is feasible and how to best study this topic.
Thank you. And I just want to jump onto something you said about there being countries that do not have a statutory minimum wage, and there being countries in the European Union that do have a statutory minimum wage. And this is something that I've been thinking about a little bit in terms of like those countries that do not have a statutory minimum wage. It's pretty clear that the adequate wages there come purely from collective bargaining or from individual bargaining, right? And that there's not this central level policy making in the mix in terms of what the legal minimum wage is or what workers can rely on in terms of rights to a lowest wage floor. But there are a lot of countries that do have a minimum wage and that do also a statutory minimum wage, but that do also set wage floors in collective agreements, right? And I count the Netherlands as one of them. And all in all, we see that in the European Union, about 60% of workers are covered by collective bargaining agreements, and many of those agreements have wage floors in them. So should we consider those wage amounts as part of the legal minimum wage, as the adequate wages that Europeans have a right to rely on? Or should we think of minimum wages as something separately regulated by law and the collective bargaining agreements wages as something that is more an ad hoc agreement that can also be revoked at the end of the agreement, for example?
Yeah, so on this question, I think there are maybe three main ways of how to look at this. And I think there is a certain relationship between the earned wages and actually the collectively agreed wages. So first of all, I think that in many sectors, the earned wages are driven by collectively agreed pay. So in some extent, you can say that collectively agreed pay drives the earned wages. And second of all, I also think that the collectively agreed pay in some countries drives wages and has effect on wages outside of their coverage and outside of their sector. You can say this about manufacturing or automotive sector, that sometimes they operate as kind of wage signals for employers across the whole economy, and therefore influence wages outside of their coverage where they are directly related. And what I also think, and maybe you can add to this, as in it could be an interesting topic for research, and I'm sure some research has been done there, is between the relationship between the statutory minimum wages and the collectively agreed wages. So I'm sure there is these are correlated, and there is possible spillover effects from increasing statutory minimum wages on the collectively bargain wages. Yeah, we have experienced some big hikes in minimum wages, for instance, Spain in 2019 by more than 22%. And there are some other cases of big statutory hikes.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, Laurens, if the EU minimum wage directive comes into force, we in the Netherlands will also have quite a hike in terms of the minimum wage, right? From the €10.95 at the moment to €14 per hour, according to new statutory regulations. So that would be interesting to see if that will jolt a whole new set of wage negotiations, especially at the bottom pay scales. And I want to, before we continue, I just want to say that I know that we have a lot of experts in the room. I mentioned Laurens now, who knows a lot about wages in the Netherlands in collective agreements, but I know there's several of you who have a lot of knowledge here. So if you want to jump into this conversation, if you have a question that you would like us to discuss, post it in the chat. If you want to say something, also feel free to just raise your hand so that we can include you in this conversation. And I think it's one of the what you mentioned, this interplay, Jakub, between the statutory minimum wages, the earned minimum wages, and the wages as they are agreed in the collective agreements, in the CBAs, that is something that we don't have, at least from a comparative perspective, a lot of grasp on. And it's one of the things, that interplay, that we really want to look into in the bar wage project as well. And so I've been really thinking about this a lot, because traditionally, the way that we research the effect of collective bargaining on wages is by looking at microdata. So we basically compare the wages of workers who are covered by a collective agreement to the wages of workers who are not covered by a collective agreement, pretty much in the same way that we would look at the gender pay gap, for example. We compare those two groups. And there's a lot of knowledge there already. So from that kind of research, we know that workers who are covered by collective bargaining on average earn a little bit more than workers who are not covered. We also know that it matters whether you're covered by a firm level agreement or by a sector level agreement. So these kind of knowledge we have. But then we know very little about the amounts that are actually in the collective agreements. And so there seems to be this kind of like tacit assumption that if we have somebody, for example, who is covered by a collective agreement and who earns, say, 2,500 euro per month, that this must be because that's what's written in the collective agreement. But we don't actually know that, right? And there might be a variety of things at play. We know that if this is a Swedish agreement, it's quite likely that the agreement actually only sets a wage floor, so that it would only say that they should earn more than 1,500. And the 2,500 comes from somewhere else. It might be that the collective agreement doesn't actually specify any wage levels, or it might be a collective agreement that tells you exactly, based on the job you have and the tenure you have, how much you should earn. And so from that perspective, I've been thinking or wondering, like, what exactly is the added value of knowing what is in those agreements, right? So, and from that perspective, I would say that is why we can't just take those micro data and say, look, people with collective agreements earn more, but why we actually need to know what's in those collective agreements. And I know that you've been in this discussion as well, Jakub, with countries asking you, can't we just send you the micro data? So I'm wondering what your perspective is here. So,
as you say, there are great data on the national level. So different countries have great national level data, which are super focused and super specific in terms of how many people are covered, how many people earn a specific wage. There are perfect national data registers where you can actually access all the information on the collectively agreed pay. However, what I think our problem in terms of setting up a European comparative databases is that we have to do this across 27 EU member states. And so I would maybe say some of the problems that we come across is, first of all, comparability, because there are several approaches, but we have to compare apples to apples. Therefore, we have to identify jobs or sectors which we are comparing across the countries. Also, another problem that we have come across is that in some countries, a job can be low paid because we are focusing on the low and medium paid jobs. But in another country, it could be a medium or a higher paid job. So therefore, this also creates, there is some averaging out on the general low paid jobs. And also its representativeness. We try to be as representative as possible, given all the data sources like the labor force surveys and the structure of earning surveys and the data on collective bargaining coverage that is available. And we try to really look for the jobs or sectors which cover a lot of employees or a lot of the labor force, and also to simply have a representative sample and creating a representative sample of the collective agreements that we gather. So we have together created a very complicated system of how to set up this kind of database and structure. And maybe I have a question for you. What do you think about the data availability of the national data registers, as your team has been approaching the national registers?
Right, yeah. So to give a little bit of very, very quick background to this question, if we want to create a database with the pay rates in collective agreements, the first thing we need to know is which collective agreements actually exist, right? Because otherwise, how can I code the collective agreements? And so that is really what this question is about. So do we have that in different countries? And I think the lesson that I've learned from these projects so far is that we're probably going to have to take a country by country approach. And we have a number of countries where the answer to your question is that it's absolutely very viable. This includes the Netherlands, but also Spain, France, where we actually have a complete register of collective agreements. So we know exactly how many there are, because the social partners need to declare the agreements they sign with the government or with some other public institution. In Italy also, this is the case. So we have a pretty good overview of who's there. And then also in Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands, we even actually know exactly which sectors are covered by these agreements. And very crucially, we know how many workers are covered by each agreement. And that makes our job a lot easier, because that gives us a real ability to estimate what wages are being paid and how heavy to weigh the information from each agreement, right? But I think in many countries, we either have no register at all, or we have incomplete registers, or we have a register that, for example, has the collective agreements and the sectors that are covered, but doesn't give you any information in terms of how many people are covered by a collective agreement. And I see that Laurens just unmuted his microphone, so I'm thinking that he might want to say something.
Oh, you're very sharp. Well, in the Netherlands, we have good data, but still we don't have data about how many people are covered by minimum wages. So you do know something about how many people are covered by a collective agreement, but not how many people earn the minimum wages. And that also is something you would like to know, I guess.
Absolutely. And so you're referring to the lowest wage scales in the collective agreement, right here?
Yes.
So not the statutory minimum wage, but the ones that are agreed in the agreement. Yeah. And that is, I'm so happy you say that, because it's actually one of the things that we're really looking forward to try and explore for the case of the Netherlands and Italy, also in the bar wage project, and for which we are going to enlist Laurens' help from the ABVN, who is a partner in the bar wage project also. And this, you're right, this is probably the most difficult question that we're going to be answering. And we're also just going to try and answer that for 2 countries where we think we have at least a chance of being able to answer this question. But yeah, I think if we look at pay scales, it's still a big mystery for most of us, how many workers are in that pay scale at which point. So we know maybe the total, but how much is everybody earning? And I'm very interested also in the next 2 years, Laurens, to talk to you and to see what your feeling is for how close the actual earned wages are to the wages that are agreed in those pay scales, especially with a growing labor shortage and companies may be tempted to just pay a little bit more to attract more people. So I think that is going to be a really interesting discussion. I need to round up, so I just want to also round up with something about the Eurofund project. Jakub, I happen to know, obviously, because I'm in the project, that you're about to go into the field and to actually test this system. So can you just in maybe 1 minute tell us what you're going to do in the next few months in terms of piloting the Eurofund project?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the concept that we have developed together, we are now going to the field and we are going to test it. So far, we are just starting next week a phase of a mini pilot with 6 countries and 5 jobs and sectors that we are going to focus on. And our ultimate aim is to expand this on all the EU member states and cover as many sectors and jobs as possible. However, during this pilot phase, we have several questions to answer. First of all, whether this is feasible and to what extent, how resource intensive this exercise is, and also we are still establishing great cooperations with the national data registers in order to be able to fulfill this. So we are also working at the national level to be able to deliver the data that we want. And also in the next year, we would like to derive some indicators of collectively agreed pay. And these could be then, depending on how we succeed, published and used for researchers and anyone. So, and most of all, we will be publishing a methodology on how to study collectively agreed wages, etc.
Thank you very much, Jakub, and thanks a lot for joining us today. I hope it felt a little bit like coming back home, since you know most of the people here. Thank you, Laurens, for pitching in ad hoc as well. And thanks, Pauline, for the opportunity to discuss this issue here. So back to you.